Hello everybody, I hope you're all well. On this edition of the We Love Cycling video podcast, I talked to a good friend of mine, Rebecca Charlton. Now, Rebecca is a journalist, a broadcaster and a writer, and in this particular conversation, we talk about what it takes to broadcast on live television, which is a lot of fun. And we also give some advice to anybody new wanting to come into our industry. I hope you enjoy it. I certainly did. Okay, recording is in progress, all of the above. Okay.
Do you know what gets me on TV, Matt, is when in films they do TV sets and they go 3, 2, 1, and as you know that you don't hear that. Everything goes eerily silent, and they go 5, 4. I can't count. They go 3, not 2.
And then you're away. Well, you're quite right, but yes, I think that gives a little bit of an insight into perhaps, Rebecca, what we're going to be talking about. But first and foremost, thank you very much indeed for coming on to the We Love Cycling video podcast. It's essentially a podcast that you can see, which I think is quite innovative.
It is, and I'm really glad that you mentioned the fact that you'd be able to see us today. I'm trying to hide it, but you can see the amount of home studio lighting I've had to put on just to make myself look like I haven't got massive bags with a 10-month-old baby.
Well, I tell you what, that was a beautiful little segue into one of the topics that I wanted to talk about a little bit today on the pod VOD, whatever we want to call it, is the fact that you now have a new addition to your family. You and Paul are now the mother and father of little Mila, who's only 10 months old. And I've met her on a number of occasions. She's absolutely lovely. But they do cause, actually, you describe it, how disruptive in a lovely way has this little gorgeous package been to your life so far?
Gorgeous, lovely disruption. Oh, you can tell the sleep deprivation, can't you? I mean, just stringing a sentence together at the moment is a challenge. No, she's absolutely amazing, but I don't think she's got the memo on sleeping. So I am very, very tired. But, you know, it's to be expected. I sort of didn't think that I would be in the first year of parenting getting 12 hours sleep a night, so it's not too much of a surprise. But yeah, she's absolutely incredible. She's just happy as anything all day, and then nighttime just doesn't really want to sleep. She's too excited.
Yeah, she's got two creative parents. That's the thing, isn't it? You know, Paul being the musician, you being the broadcaster journalist that you are. There's a lot of creativity in there, and clearly that's inspiring her to want to be awake so she can absorb it all, perhaps.
Yeah, but that's the thing, isn't it? They do say that. And I Google a lot of things at 3 a.m. just to see what's going on. And it usually says, yes, there's a sleep regression that happens at this age, which is normally when she's just sat up laughing her head off at 2, 3, 4 a.m. in the morning. But apparently it is when they learn something new and they want to experiment, and they just find it fascinating to try this in the small hours because their rhythms aren't quite there. I mean, there are people when you go on, I try and avoid things like Mumsnet, but when you do read these forums, there's people in the middle of the night saying, same as you, and then you always get all these replies saying, well, my baby's always slept through. It's fine. And so I just ignore those ones.
I think I might have been one of those people who said to you about Josh, who's now 22, we were very lucky that he did actually sleep through quite quickly. Anyway, we won't dwell on about that. But Rebecca, in all seriousness, you've been back at work now a little while. You're managing to balance being a mum and working in our industry. How's it actually been getting back into the swing of things? Have you adapted pretty well, or is it hard, or is it better? Just give us a sense of what it's been like over the last few months.
Yeah, I think we joke and I give all the cliches. Oh, I'm so tired, I haven't slept. But actually, it's been incredible. As you know, I went back to work at the National Cycling Show with you. We were on stage about 4 or 5 weeks after I'd come out of hospital, and I think it was one of those situations where I really enjoyed going back, but looking back now, it probably was probably just like hurling myself back in and hoping for the best. But it did go really well, and I think I'm so fortunate that we all work in this lovely close-knit circle, that you knew that I was just coming back from having a baby, but actually I just felt like it worked so well going back. I'm so lucky that I've got the support of my partner, Paul. He, as you said earlier, he's a musician. So we're both freelance, we work for ourselves, we're very flexible. And that is an asset that I know isn't afforded to everyone. But he was able to bring Mila to work. And so she came to her first cycle show at about 4 weeks old. But what I found really contrasted to perhaps what I thought the case might be. I mean, I sort of thought, well, I'm going to be really tired. It's going to be really hard to kind of continue my career in a lot of ways. I mean, this was my misconception before I got pregnant, was that a lot of people would have to just end their career, would just have to stop working in creative industries, doing all these things. And I don't really know why I had such a firm idea that I would have to take this huge amount of time off from my career. But as you know, that didn't happen. And it changed the way I've worked, actually, in a really positive way.
Okay.
And I think I'm saying this to you in that a big part of our job is obviously being prepared, being well versed, having all your notes ready, especially for you in commentary and things like that. You know, you've got to know your stuff and you've got to be well armed to do your job at the end of the day. But what I found in terms of interviewing the best riders in the world, as we have the fortune of doing, is that the narrative has changed slightly. I go in well prepared, but I also feel like the organic conversations that I've had with different life experiences, new life experiences, have led to really, really interesting topics that I perhaps wouldn't have delved into before. And I remember you and I sat down with Sir Chris Hoy, didn't we, at that first job back for me?
Yeah.
And we just had such a lovely human conversation, didn't we? And sometimes you need to go off script and off topic. And we talked about parenthood, and we talked about how, I mean, he gave me a lot of advice at that point, as did you, about just coping with a newborn. And then it led into us kind of knowing a little bit more about his children's books and how he'd kind of changed the way he was working post-retirement and having children. And anyway, I just think all these things that I was worried about, yeah, can you come back? Can you hit the ground running? Can you be the same entity that you were before? Well, actually, you might not be exactly the same. You might come back with different facets to what you do. And that's definitely been the case for me. I've loved it.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing to say, and or to consider is, as a parent, as a mum or a dad, and it fundamentally just does change your perception of pretty much everything in life. Your priorities completely shift pretty much overnight. From the moment that child is here in the earth, on this planet, your priorities shift and you do start to think differently. But you don't change who you are. You're just a slightly different version of yourself with a different set of priorities and a different way of managing time. And also, doesn't make you a better person at all. It's not like comparing people who have kids to people who don't have kids. It's just a situation you find yourself in. But in terms of what we do for a living, and primarily that is communicate, convey, tell stories, give information, hopefully entertain people a bit as well. I think one of the things that I'm constantly striving for, and I know that you do the same, because we do have similar roles, different bits, but there's quite a lot of similarities, is trying to get to the human side of conversation, isn't it? To try and have a plan, be prepared, know what you're going to be talking about, but ultimately have the confidence. And I think as you get a little bit older, the older you get, the more confident you become in yourself, is the fact that people want to hear natural conversation, don't they? And like I'd like to think that's what we're having now. Clearly, I've got a few notes written down. I want to steer the conversation in a certain way, but the conversation that engages me the most is something that's the most natural. And it doesn't come, strangely, it doesn't come that easily to some people, does it? But it's something that we can always work on. And that's why I love this job. And I think you're pretty similar.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And I actually think it's crazy how much you're learning all the time about yourself, about how you work in a professional capacity. And I think, again, that chimes a lot with the interviews we do with pro riders. And it fascinates me. I mean, someone like Annemiek van Vleuten says, oh, I'm just starting to work on this element of my explosive power. I've been doing this differently in training. And I was commenting on this the other day saying, well, you know, she's allegedly in her retirement year. She's at the age she is, and she's still looking for those gains and those improvements. And it's easy to think, well, someone in her capacity who has literally won absolutely everything there is to win in the sport, hasn't she? How is she still looking to improve? How is she sort of going, oh, well, this is my weakness? Because it's so easy to say she hasn't got any weaknesses, because
Yeah.
she can, you know, she can beat absolutely everyone in every single scenario, she's proven. But I think, like, you've just hit the nail on the head. Learning about yourself and, yeah, just showing that you're human actually is, I think, so much more inspiring than going, yeah, job done, nailed it, perfection. Because, you know, I think striving for perfection just loses that human quality.
Yeah, and I think again, we strayed off onto a little bit of a path here, but I think it's important because it's what we both do for a living. It's talk to people, talk about things, and primarily talk to people. And over the last few years, we've worked together commentating, and also we've hosted. I actually forgot briefly about our cycle show back in the summer. We've got another one coming up soon, haven't we? We've done the Rouleur Classic together, and it really is. I just think it's fantastic having these conversations with people that we admire. Not just we admire them, fans admire them, but ultimately that they are just like you and me. And I think quite often, especially post race or pre race, they're preparing themselves for their event, whatever race that might be, and they almost put up this defense system, don't they, where they just answer the bare minimum because they're trying to focus on what they do. And I think as a journalist and as an interviewer, a commentator, our job somehow, and although we get to do it in slightly more relaxed environments, is to try and just get past that veneer and just open up who they are. And that in itself is a skill. That gaining of trust is a skill as well, isn't it?
And that's something else that comes with being slightly older and having done it for a really long time, is you do start to see that shift, don't you? People trust you. People know in the peloton. I mean, even the young riders that have only met perhaps you a couple of times, they know that you're not going to play the bad guy, and you want to convey to the fans what is going on in their heads and what, you know, they're looking to do in the bike race that day, and again, just be human. And I think it's such a nice place to be, where the riders do have that trust in your role and do get to know you. But something else that's interesting is, again, talking about that perfectionism. I think when I first started as a post-race reporter, a lot of people never knew which races I was on, because I was always this floating hand sort of out of vision. But I used to do a lot of that. And so I got to know a lot of the riders when I first started out. And if I had what I would describe a bad interview, and somebody didn't want to talk and they weren't in the best mood, having not had the result they wanted, I would go away and feel quite negative about that and think, I need to improve my questions, which of course, you know, in some scenarios maybe I did, but I think a lot of that is understanding that you are the person, fortunately or unfortunately, that gets to shove a microphone in their face when they've not had the day they wanted at, say, the Olympic Games, something on that scale, and they just want to go and probably sit and cry in a dark room. And you are there immediately on live television saying, give me your reaction, and be concise, and, you know, come across as media friendly. And again, as I've got older, I've realized actually that's not a reflection on perhaps the way you phrased one question. It's about understanding that that reaction might just be really raw in that moment, and you can't always overthink interviews like that. But what the luxury is being able to sit down in these show environments like Rouleur and Cycle Show and National Cycling So, is that actually you get a completely different element, don't you, by having these in-depth chats. And last year at Rouleur, Demi Vollering was crying and made me cry in the interview. I mean, that's something that is probably quite rare when you're just getting quick flash interviews, isn't it? But actually to see what all those wins meant when she was sat down in a different environment, able to really reflect on it, that kind of interview is really special.
So Rebecca, over the last 10 or 15 years, the sport has changed, the industry has changed, opportunities for women within the industry and the sport have changed, which we've talked about a lot in other forums. But my question to you in relation to all that, what's the biggest thing that you've learned about yourself over the last decade or so?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a big question. Going back to some of the things we've touched upon previously and in other chats, is not striving for that perfection. I think the biggest thing I've learned is people want to see you. They want to work with you or know you in other capacities because you're the person you are. And I think sometimes you can definitely overthink everything and strive for something that you, I guess, visualize as this pinnacle of perfectionism, but actually no one expects that from you. And I think that would be the biggest thing that I've learned when I started in cycling journalism many years ago.
You can give us the year to add context. When did you start in the
I
industry?
started
Well,
in
I know, but
2006.
okay.
Properly full-time in cycling 2006. And then my first Tour de France was 2007. And I went in thinking, right, I've got to get into every press scrum, get every interview, be perfect. And actually, I just wish I could go back to that person and say, you're doing a great job. You're learning as you go. You are bringing your own individual element to this. Don't apologize for yourself.
Yeah.
And that kind of ties in nicely with the question on how much sport has changed for me as a female in the sport, and for women, whether that be racing or coming in as a journalist. Things like being able to just be yourself in terms of saying, yeah, I wanna start a family. I want to take a bit of time out to either have maternity leave from a pro cycling team, which we know is now possible, or to say, actually, this is me, I'm presenting pregnant, as I was doing in the sort of previous year. And I think, sorry, really loud motorbike there.
I didn't hear it, actually. I didn't hear it, no.
Explaining that strange noise coming from my audio. So yeah, I think that's the biggest thing I've learned, is that it is important to be you. Don't try and be someone else and emulate somebody else's success. But also, it's easier to say that now, because as a woman coming in 2005, 2006, it was not the most friendly place to be.
Yeah.
At certain points. And I would like to think that we have all collectively changed that together, and now it's a much nicer place to be as a woman in this industry.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear, and it's I think that leads us nicely on to this year, doesn't it? Where, I mean, you've worked for, both of us have actually worked together for Eurosport quite a little bit of time ago. We've done quite a lot together on racing. We've commentated together, we've presented together, but for the first time at Het Nieuwsblad this year, and then subsequent to that, Strada Bianca, although I was working for the Italian crew on site. You were front and center of two gold events, what we call gold events for Eurosport GCN, Inside the Cube, whole production. I was commentating on Het Nieuwsblad. You were lead presenter holding the show together with Adam Blythe and Dan Lloyd. And that was quite a big deal, wasn't it, for you? I mean, can you just describe firstly how it came about, and secondly, I was there, although we're really good mates. People should realize we're good mates outside of doing this. We're good mates, but we hardly spoke that day because we were both full on doing. It was like, you're right, yeah, fine, and we hardly even chatted. I felt a bit guilty going home. I was driving home thinking I hardly spoke to Rebecca, but anyway.
No, I felt guilty because I was literally like, hi, because actually quite often we're not in the same building, aren't we?
No.
I mean, you're floating. People think you're floating in a heli over the race, obviously. We're getting your wings ready to commentate on.
Got my microphone looking down on the race and commentating, and it doesn't quite work like that. But
no, but we're very rarely in the same studio.
That's right.
We were all in the London studio, and that was amazing. But I think that just sums up the nature of live television. You hope that you look like the Swan, don't you? But it's such a full-on experience most of the time that you don't really get that downtime to chat. You're constantly just on top of what you're doing work-wise, and just making sure that you're across everything that's happening. And I think for Het Nieuwsblad, we had the men's race and the women's race, and you're kind of waiting for the women's coverage to come in, and we can only go live with that, can't we, at Eurosport GCN, as that sort of host footage comes in. So you're just constantly on standby, really. So no, I felt bad that we didn't get a natter that day, but we'll make up for it now.
We are making up for it now, and hopefully we'll make up for it over a drink. It's sort of very, very soon as well. But just in terms of, again, we don't want to give away too many trade secrets, but essentially that was quite an intense gig that you had, especially given the fact that quite often now, simultaneously, we're doing men's and women's races, which often overlap, and both Strade Bianche, funnily enough, and Het Nieuwsblad did have separate races. But what was your role like? Can you just, people would have seen you in Vision in that real, the Cube it's called, isn't it? It's pretty cutting edge. It's used for all of our gold events, the Giro, well, to Tour de France, of course, and all the classics. But just tell people as much as you can what it was like for you. What was your routine throughout the day, and what was your job, if you know what I mean? What was your role?
Yeah, and I think we can assume that, can't we, that people kind of know how it works and what's going on behind the scenes. But I think it's fascinating because people don't know. And actually being in the Cube for the first time, as you say, complete state-of-the-art studio, absolutely incredible. And that was the first time I'd stepped in there. And it's such a fancy environment, isn't it?
Very fancy, yeah.
Much going on with all the graphics and the abilities that you've got to just show things as they're happening on huge screens and inclinometers. It's fantastic. But I just want to quickly go back to answer your first question about how it all came about, and the fact that it was a huge deal for me. It was even more so because I was just coming back from essentially a bit of maternity leave. And as I've touched upon before, I did have this misconception that I would just have to kind of like hand the baton and give up my career in some way and not do the same jobs as I did before I got pregnant. And actually, that I would just say to anybody that I wouldn't have expected within a few months to be hosting what I think is the pinnacle of cycling coverage, hosting the breakaway in the Cube. It was a dream role, and something that I just felt so fortunate to be doing so soon after having a baby. So it certainly wasn't the case that I didn't come back to what I was doing before. I actually sort of superseded that and did new things and amazing things as well. So I think it's really important to anyone worrying in some capacity that they can't possibly come back. I'd like to think it is possible, but I just want to say how much support I had to do that role. So I was standing in for the first two opening races for a good friend of mine, Orla Chenoweth, who of course is the host of the breakaway, and she's just been the biggest champion for me stepping into that studio for a couple of weeks, along with my agent Emma. And I just think it's so important to say that, because again, from the outside, people don't know how things have come about. And I was standing in for a friend and colleague, and so that was a really nice place to be as well. It totally championed me in and helped so much as well, because there's so many questions when you're going into a brand new studio, and it's a hectic day. So I think the biggest thing that people probably don't know is how much you have going on in your ears, and that's something I'd love to hear your experience on as well, because I think when you're sat at home, it looks pretty straightforward, but you're constantly listening not only to perhaps the fact that the race has already started, you're waiting to cut across to it, but has someone already gone in an early breakaway? What's happened? You want to keep across that, but also there's ad break coming up in 10 seconds. You're interacting with guests and making sure that you're kind of keeping everything in order to keep to time, and obviously fantastic producers and directors behind the scenes, but you're constantly listening to what's happening not only next to you in the studio, but potentially in the race, potentially from something that's just come in, a bit of news you might have to announce, a new interview, a rider's perhaps crashed out already. So I think that probably for me is the thing that people don't see, is just how much you're staying across in your head and in your ears.
It's quite I've never done I've never hosted the Cube, so I've never experienced what you've done, but I've seen it, and I have hosted on site before. I've been a pundit on site, but as a lead, as the host, you're the anchor, bearing in mind, I think what people have got to bear in mind, I'm sure that they do realize, none of this is pre-recorded. There's some VTs that might be pre-recorded that we drop in, especially on some of the bigger events, but essentially when the camera comes in and you open up the program, it's live. And you're quite right. You've got Doug in your ear, our producer, or whoever the producer might be, talking you through what's coming up next. Then you've got to consider what VTs are being thrown to. Quite often, deep into the program, when you're shortly going to throw to the live race, you need to know what's going on in the race. You also need to be abreast of what Dan and Adam are saying, or whoever those two people might be. There is so much information, and then you've got to speak. You've got to read the auto cue sometimes. Well, it's not all auto cue. Some bits are on the auto cue. Some bits are just natural conversation. And then if something happens dynamically in the race, you then got to bring that in as well. And so the conversation flows and is relevant. You've got to be able to juggle, basically, haven't you? But still stay calm and project that all I'm doing is speaking now. But quite often there are 2 or 3 things simultaneously going on in your mind, aren't there?
There are, and I think actually it might have been Ned Bolting, again, our good friend and colleague Ned. I think it might have been him that shared this, and it was the first time I'd ever seen someone put this out on Twitter a little while ago. He said, by the way, for anyone having a little dig on Twitter about broadcasters, this is what you have in your ear. And I don't know if you saw that clip, but
I don't think I did.
he somehow put the entire audio on, or perhaps one of his colleagues did, and it was just the absolute barrage of like 10, 9, blah, 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 this is happening. Oh, that person's make sure you do this. Oh, ad breaks coming in. This is going. And then all you could hear is Ned and his colleague just like so smoothly into the show, but also hearing what they're battling in their ear. And I think a lot of people are like, oh,
yeah,
wouldn't like that.
I think, yeah, I mean, it's something that it's a skill that you learn and you get better at, and I think some people are better at it than others. But it can be, in a good way. I mean, it can be quite stressful in its own way. I mean, it's trying to control that and trying to and quite often when I've been in similar situations, I often think that what I've delivered has been awful. I'm never ever satisfied. You're like, oh my God, because of what's going on in your head, there's no way that you can conceive that anything you're saying is going to be anything more than way below average and borderline sackable. But then when you listen to it back, and I'm not a big fan of watching stuff back myself, it's like, oh, that was all right. But somehow you do it, don't you? But it's just this disconnect with what's going on inside your brain, these 3 or 4 strands of information. Then you're trying to communicate. You can't really see anything other than chaos, can you?
That is just such a good point on how you're internalized, because you might have someone being like, oh, we're just going to throw to a V. No, we're not. No. And you're like, and let's do this. I'm looking at the wrong camera. And then actually people don't know what that you were supposed to do. So hopefully 9 times out of 10, like you say, you look back and go, huh, that's absolutely fine.
It is quite weird, and it's the being able to adapt as well, because cycling is a dynamic sport, and also and live television is an enormously dynamic thing. We're in an age when things are pretty cutting edge, state of the art, but sometimes things don't go according to plan, and sometimes things change, and sometimes VTs aren't lined up, or you're about to throw to something, as you just said, oh, we're not going to do that now. And then it's up to you to pick up that slack, isn't it? And just make sure that it doesn't, because nobody else can hear what's going on in your ear, but you've got to try and ensure that you remain calm, and you're projecting this image of a really smooth and shiny show. But quite often in your own head, it's just almost like on fire.
Or alternatively, you could just turn to camera 1 and just be like, huh, panic. No, but I actually love it. I mean, as do you, because that's why we do what we love. But I really enjoy the chaos. I've always been like, I've always chased deadlines, and I'm notorious for this. Anyone that knows me, as you do as well, I think knows that I love a tight deadline and I like pushing it as well. And I worked in magazines, and I was sort of across staff writing and editorship by the end of kind of my stint in magazines. And of course, that's massively down to the wire and deadline driven. And I just loved that. I kind of need that adrenaline and that chasing. Are we going to make it? Are we going to get off to print at 6 o'clock? Oh God, this is and actually to really look back and think, oh, I think I really enjoyed the fact that article fell through, or that writer didn't come in with that piece, because I would quite often be like, right, I need to get an interview now. I need to phone up a rider. I need to replace that article. I'm going to have to write it myself or delegate. But I kind of really enjoyed that firefighting. So it was never mundane. And I think that's obviously amplified on live TV, that you're thinking in the moment, aren't you? And you're thinking on your feet and you're having to deliver, because I joke, but essentially you can't just turn around and go, oh my God, there's so much going on. that's that, you know, you've always got to come up with a solution as you go. And I think I just really, really enjoy the adrenaline rush. It's
a lot of fun, isn't it? I often say to people, I feel like I'm harping on when I say it, but it's a job that I feel quite privileged to do. And I know a lot of people would give their right arm to do something that we're doing. And but there is a craft to it, there's an art to it, and the beauty about anything that is a craft is that you're constantly chasing perfection. You're never going to get it. And the moment I think that you think you're good at something, or no, you might feel that you're confident or you're accomplished, but the moment you think you've nailed it is the moment that you've taken your foot off the gas. It's always looking for improvements, isn't it? It's like in elite sport. We talk about elite sport, that's our job, but what we do is very different, but we're still as professional and as driven. And I'm always looking for something new, something a little bit different, and something fresh. And I think that's why I like this job so much, because it is changing, and the tech around it as well, the way we broadcast is changing as well, and expectancies are slightly different. And it's quite an invigorating environment, isn't it?
It is. And like you say, I think with the pandemic, we all started doing things like this on Zoom and actually setting up home studios. And I had a lot of fun with my first green screen. I obviously green screened myself to the green screen. I'll share that with you.
You'd have just been a floating head if you were in that top, just two arms and a floating head.
We'll send you the result on video. It was because I said to my producer, it was actually Simon Littleton. I said, I mean, I will avoid green, but does it actually? Would I really be a floating head? He said, yes, yeah. But he said, go on, see what would happen. So I popped a green outfit on, and it was brilliant. Not for the broadcast, obviously not. But I'll send that footage through for your perusal.
Thank you very much.
But no, I think things are changing all the time, and that's another interesting thing to embrace, isn't it? Because I think we had, when I did a degree in journalism, I specialised in broadcasting, and it was very traditional back then, the early 2000s. We were looking at very kind of terrestrial mainstream broadcasters as having sort of made it and got into the industry. But now, you know, the digital platforms that are leading the way has completely changed the game, and it's diversified what we see as success and what we see as something to be pursuing.
I mean, just off the back of that, about how things have changed and the experience that you've gained over the last 15 or so years, a little bit more than that now. Somebody watching this, somebody listening to this, who wants to, because there are a lot of people, but I get asked, you know, with relative regularity, young people coming through the sport, a lot of professionals who haven't quite made it, but are looking to stay on social media, move into journalism, create something of their own, which a lot of people are doing successfully, some better than others. The whole landscape, the business landscape of what we do is constantly changing and evolving as big players, legacy players implode, other things happen. There's a lot more independent journalists, freelancing, influencers, that sort of thing. But what piece of advice would you give to somebody who wants to come into our industry and who wants to do something similar to what we do, or at least make a mark? What advice would you give somebody?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, because it has entirely changed. And I think what I might have said a decade ago wouldn't really apply now. And I undoubtedly moved into publishing and journalism and kind of climbed the ladder to where I wanted to be through having a degree in journalism. I did my NCTJ national qualification for journalists. I joined all the sort of bodies of journalists in the UK to become a news writer and accredited. And so you kind of had to take that path, I think, back then, to get a foot in the door. And that's essentially how I got into big magazine companies. Is by
more traditional route, wasn't it, back then?
Yeah. And I did 2 years of media law and politics, and kind of came in that sort of traditional route. And then I think it massively did help when I got into sort of the niche of cycling. I'd been a cyclist in the past, which was why I kind of moved into such a niche topic. But I also applied everything I knew about what you can and can't say about riders, making sure that nobody on your team is writing anything defamatory. So
Sure.
I learned a lot about that, and I think it is still important to be across what you're saying online. I do, but I equally think now my biggest advice would be that you don't have to now wait. I don't think you have to wait to kind of get your foot in this established door. I think we've seen young journalists come in and put their opinion. I mean, I'm just talking now, I guess, about the niche of bike racing, but people come onto Twitter as a new face and name, and they say, do you know what, this is my analysis of that race, this is my opinion, this is what I thought. And actually, if you're sharing something people want to see and read, you can build a huge reputation for yourself by actually just putting yourself out there and using your own platforms and forums to do that, such as your own social media. And I think you'd agree that, we've seen some really interesting people come through that aren't necessarily qualified journalists or ex-bike riders, but they've observed a lot of racing. They've gone out and they've got interviews off their own back, or they've started a podcast or a blog, and actually made a really successful route into the industry. So I think that's changing, and that people can use their own platforms now in a way that we didn't have when, way back when I didn't have the internet.
Indeed. No, it's a lot more, I think, what word can I use? It's democratic, perhaps. There's certainly a lot more options. It obviously means that we've got to try and keep doing a good job as well, doesn't it? There's nothing taken for granted, is it? But there are a lot that there are other platforms out there to be seen. And one thing I would add to what you were saying, Rebecca, because again, I get asked it a little bit, and there will undoubtedly people be watching this who are keen on learning about our industry, is do something just a little bit different, and don't be afraid to be yourself. I think people quite often try and be a version of themselves that is unsustainable, or they look at something on television. There's so much media around. We're all influenced in some ways, but I think being true to yourself and being honest, and having the confidence to just, whatever you're talking about, whether it's cycling, whether it's beyond films, movies, whatever, pop music, it's about, I think, having an integrity, doing something your way and holding on to that. I think that will serve you well, because you'll never have to be pretending at all. I think that's my piece of advice.
I think you've articulated that more concisely than me, but I completely agree. And I think it goes back to be authentic, be you. And again, like you mentioned before, how you can have so much going on in your head in live broadcasts that you think, God, that's not going to have come across well. But actually, when you see things that you have perhaps thought, oh, that was perfect, that went really well, actually sometimes it might have been lacking something that you didn't think at the time. So just being authentic and being a bit different, really agree with that.
Definitely. And even if that involves wearing something green and having a floating head when you're doing your
why not stand out or don't.
Rebecca, just before we wrap things up, what's next? What's up next for you? I know we're working together at the gorgeous Alexandra Palace on the Cycle Show in just a few weeks, which is exciting. Looking forward to that. What else is coming up?
So I'm really looking forward to the Cycle Show, because of course I'm going to be sharing the stage with the Matthew Stevens, but also so many brilliant guests there. I always have a habit of telling you things whenever you chat to me in these situations. I always seem to say something I'm not supposed to say, and I'm not supposed to say this potentially, but I've been working with Alexander Zinchenko on a documentary, and speaking to him about how basically the crisis in Ukraine has affected him and his mental health. So we've been talking about that, and if I wasn't supposed to say that, I apologise, but that will be coming soon as well.
Brilliant stuff. Well, I'm going to keep my eyes peeled for that one, Rebecca. That sounds well important, and also massively interesting as well, of course. Rebecca, it's been a pleasure. It always is. We need to catch up for that drink sooner rather than later. Where can we catch you on? What's your Twitters and your Instagrams, just so people know to see you and catch up with you?
thank you. At Becca Charlton _Insta.
Right.
All the configurations of my name were taken. And on Twitter at Becca Charlton.
Nice one.
Yeah.
Brilliant stuff. You take care. Catch up with you soon.
Cheers, Matt. Thank you.
Bye.